My parents Antoine and Fida Abi-Harb were both born in Lebanon, my father in a northern village of poverty, my mother in the city of Tripoli. War never really broke out in Lebanon so much as fluctuated with intensity over the last few centuries as a result of religious tensions that could never be civilly quelled. As a result of particularly increased tensions and a consequent fear for their lives, a large portion of those in the country who could afford to fled to countries that would accept them, and my parents were part of that bunch. And so they experienced what we call a feeling or sentiment of diaspora, noted by Helmut Anhia and Yudhishthir Raj Isar in our Week 5 reading Unsettling the National Heritage and Diaspora, as literally a scattering of seeds. In said text, Anhia and Isar note that a longing to return to one's homeland is classically assumed to be integral to diasporic consciousness. If this was not already evident by the way my father often proudly spoke of how much better Lebanon is than everywhere else, and how he wants to go back to live there forever, I thought it would still be appropriate to ask him if he possesses this longing. He said, "Of course, yes, I would love to be able to go back there. That land, Lebanon, was where I grew up, where I became myself. I'm very happy and comfortable here, I don't want you to misunderstand, but I'll never be as happy and comfortable as I would be if I was to return. I love the nature there too much." I expected differently from my mother, who had already given me evidence to think she was not of the same mind. "Oh no, not at all. Of course, I love my family and my mother is still there, and I would love to see her as much as I can before she passes. But that place is a hellhole. Everyone there is always on edge, scared that you're going to attack them for their religious belief or something like that. Once you've lived in a nice place like Australia, it's impossible to return back there and live comfortably." This was one of the more interesting points made by my mother, as it was in stark contrast to what Einheier and Isar spoke about the feelings of diaspora. Was my mother even experiencing diaspora then? I won't forget my experience in 2009, finally going with my family to Lebanon, finally getting to see the nation of my background properly. For 5 weeks, we surveyed the country of old broken civilizations and did everything humanly possible to do in the entire country. On the day of our leaving, my dad was filled with sadness and obvious grief. My mother was indifferent. When we arrived home, my mother commented that 5 weeks was too long a time and she was going to explode by the end of it, from boredom. What became very curious for me was the notion that my mother had lived comfortably and wealthily growing up in Lebanon, whilst my dad was forced to hunt birds for meat lest his family starve. Should they not be experiencing each other's sentiments towards Lebanon? Anhar and Izar go on. The real or perceived impossibility of return is more or less naturalized in this context, feeding an enduring, if sometimes merely residual, sense of dislocation and displacement. Reading this for the first time, I understandably assumed the writers were speaking of impossibility to return based on current physical conflict present in the homeland, and thus feeling discontent having never assimilated in their country of refuge well enough. Here I had the interesting occasion in which my mother experienced very much the same impossibility of return, but it was as a direct result of her having assimilated into Australia too well, and was unable to bear the less civilized notions of her past life, which she so easily left behind. In Week 6, we explored Aborigines and representation, and the digital repositories which may very well have painted a different picture of experiences such as those of the stolen generation, or initial assimilation of the white colony into Australia. Applying this aspect to the story of my parents, I wondered as to what story was being communicated via media with regards to their forced diaspora from their country. From what evidence has shown, the media focused almost wholeheartedly on the war ravaging the Middle East, and rightly so. But, as a result, the story of the thousands of civilians fleeing their country in fear of religious war remained untold, and it was something that they'd have to hold with them in their struggle of making a life from nothing. I asked my father what hardships he encountered that people never really took notice of. According to him, knowing no one was the hardest, I think, apart from learning the language. The combination of those two things made living here very hard for the first few years, the hardest years of my life in fact. Knowing no one meant that I couldn't have things translated for me, and so I was forced to learn a bit of English. I was constantly living in fear that I was going to break a rule or law that I didn't know existed, or something along those lines. In Week 7, we visited the construction of memory from images of a variety of mediums. As would be expected, the most of my parents' past can be deduced by old photographs. A strong sense of a past and lost life is inflicted upon those like my parents who view these photographs, which trigger a melancholy of attachment to a life once lived that one may never live again. The finality of life and death hits very hard. I asked my mother what she felt when she came across old photos of her old life. According to her, it makes me cry every now and then. I would see old photos of me holding my favorite Tintin books and remembering how they used to make me so happy. And seeing my parents looking so much younger than they are now is obviously very sad, because they'll never look like that again. Overall, this major project really helped me reach further into my parents' past than I ever have before. I know I'll never experience their hardship, but I'll be glad to know that I can still now continue to find out strange things about their relationship to their homeland that I've never known until now.